startups in India. What's your decision-making framework when evaluating whether a founder is visionary versus enthusiastic?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Visionary versus enthusiastic. Well, all founders are sort of very passionate and enthusiastic by definition. If they were not, they would not choose this very hard.
Often described as a mathematical language because of its precise grammar and structured rules. Do you see parallels between that kind of linguistic precision, that way we think about computational models or even LLMs today?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. It's very near and dear to my heart. Yeah, I was passionate enough to learn Sanskrit. I actually earned a master's degree in Sanskrit, which was very hard but very interesting.
Hi everyone. Today I am honored to be joined by Aamod Sathe, currently the Director of Data Science at Meta. Over the course of his career, he has held influential leadership roles including Director of Product Analytics at PayPal and Lead of Marketing Analytics at Google. Across these roles, Aamod has consistently combined technical expertise with strategic product thinking, building bridges between analytics, product, and data science to drive large scale impact and transformative decisions. In addition to his professional leadership, Amod is also an active angel investor, particularly in India's growing startup ecosystem, with a strong focus on AI first innovation. In our conversation today, we will explore his path through product and data science leadership and evolving role of AI in shaping the future, and even how timeless ideas from Sanskrit scriptures can offer fresh perspectives for our professional and personal lives. Hi Amod, welcome to Latency and Latte. Your career has spanned some of the most impactful and innovative companies in the world. I want to start at the beginning of your journey before we dive into where the future of AI is headed.
Yeah, I mean, if I have to just look back early trajectory of my career, I guess, I mean, I was born in middle class family in India that always had a lot of emphasis on education, on learning. Got super. I was exposed to math and science early, so of course, with exposure comes curiosity. So I got curious. I was, after a lot of trying, I got into one of the best engineering institutes in India. So all of this was very good grounding to what eventually led to a graduate degree. I also got a little lucky, I would say. In my graduate school, I was studying at that time was a niche area of nonlinear optimization, what we today call machine learning. So I guess I just got very, very lucky that I got into this field before it even had a name. Yeah, and then from that point on, I would say, it's a lot of hard work, but also some luck of meeting the right people, working with the right mentors, having guidance from great managers and leaders alike. And it's always a mix of some luck, some hard work, being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. Hard work is very important. Even the luck meets opportunity. It's still there, but hard work cannot beat anything. So, if you could rewind to your early career, what were the key inflation points that set you on the path towards data science leadership? Were there any projects, mentors, or risks that shaped the trajectory you are on today?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of trajectory, like I said, I got into the field purely because I was very interested. I was always interested in math. I was not a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I did well. And I got into a field, like I said, which was nonlinear optimization. I got into using neural networks when we could only have about 100, 200 tokens. They were not even called tokens. That's not how we
Yeah.
looked at neural networks back then. And they were certainly not deep networks. But
Yeah.
problems that could be inherently solved using machine learning, right? So one of my early career breaks was when I started working with a professor at Penn State where I was, and the problem was a defense related problem where we needed to do nonlinear optimization to automatically relocate resources as required throughout a very complex system that was only possible to solve through machine learning. And that project was just so interesting and had such real world application that really got me interested. I think one other thing that has definitely shaped my career throughout has been just this focus on more learning and outcomes that sort of lead to more enrichment over titles or other things, and sort of the other things kind of follow if with you when you do that is sort of my thought. But and again, maybe there were multiple sort of points that led to that. I wouldn't call as one inflection, but that sort of those decisions definitely helped overall.
Absolutely. I was reading somewhere where back then in neural networks, 200, 300 tokens were there, and tokens was not even coined. They
That's
used
right.
to call it bit data or something. And now 1 million tokens, Claude Sonnet 4 supports 1 million tokens.
That's right.
So things have drastically changed.
Definitely. Text processing was very hard, which is why there were no
Yeah.
tokens, and there were bit based measurement on how big of a model we could build.
Yeah, absolutely. Given your deep data science background, what's your perspective on the ethical dimensions of AI, especially around biases, transparency, interpretability?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say it's very, very important for practitioners and researchers alike to really think deeply about the bias and the ethical choices they're making, both when designing specific products and how somebody could use that product. And so, from an
Right.
outcome perspective, I think the design aspects are very important. As a data
Mhm.
scientist, I would definitely say one of the key things for a data scientist to keep in mind is just the data that goes in these models. Like the models are getting more and more powerful, but what is also fueling the usage of AI is the availability of data. Now, with so much data available, it is up to data scientists to ensure that the data is not inherently biased in any way. Be very rigorous on how they measure that type of bias, right? And there are multiple industry standards now that can be inherited to do something like this. It takes time and it is not a very straightforward sometimes, but it's a very critical step in my mind. Any technology that is not designed to deal with bias, I think
Mhm.
over time will lose its appeal among consumers anyway. So I think there is both ethical considerations as well as business considerations in my mind why this should be top of the agenda for most data science teams that help build models and help productionalize these and so on.
Do you think companies should prioritize explainability over accuracy in certain use cases?
Oh, 100%. I think I would try to prioritize explainability over, well, I wouldn't say explainability over accuracy, because many times that is not required as a either or situation. It is a choice of model, for example, that could just change the explainability of an AI system. And those are the type of things that a data scientist could control early on. So I would always opt for more explainability wherever possible, and transparency that comes with it. I think transparency builds trust, and trust just lead to better engagement, better outcomes, and also help counter bias to your earlier bias question point.
And have you seen a model where ethical design became competitive advantage? I mean, if we have all ethically packed models, so that could be a competitive advantage over time.
I mean, rather than name any one model, right? Like I would say one of the things that I personally like in using a lot of different products that all of us or many consumers these days use is there are some products that clearly tell you their thinking steps. There are some products that are able to clearly articulate how they are going about solving a particular problem or how they are going about answering a particular question. I think that is one example where it's transparency that is sort of built into the product experience. And as a consumer, I know that increases my confidence. I know where my data is coming from. I know where how much I
Mhm.
can trust the outcome. So I think that's maybe one of the examples where I would say that type of a product design is inherently better than the one that doesn't prioritize transparency.
Yeah, makes sense. We should inculcate that from the beginning, so it won't be a problem
That's
down the
right.
line.
Should be a design principle.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I have seen your story about 10-minute delivery in India. It captures how a local need can inspire operational brilliance. So I'm curious how this mindset can cross borders, especially since constraints in one market often breed innovations others can learn from. So how do you see hyperlocal innovations like 10-minute delivery in India influencing global startup
That's right.
thinking?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes the hyperlocal innovation in itself can stay local. I mean, it is solving by definition a very localized problem.
Yeah.
Rather than say how somebody else could copy the same innovation, I
Mhm.
always tend to look at the principles that the founders or the product designers use to solve that particular problem, right? So like to your point, the 10-minute delivery is a perfect hyperlocal example because it has a specific need in the context that larger cities in India operate in. And so it solves that particular problem. So what are the principles that the product designers use for this, right? Like say they took a particular constraint of the geography and converted that into an advantage, where they essentially said, you know what, if we cannot cross large geographic distances in short time. To enable this, we are going to keep everything within a specified geography and then solve a problem there, and then scale from there, and sort of essentially multiply these honeycombs. I think that as a principle of converting a constraint into your key product feature, that is something that can be transferred over to other geographies, other areas, that the other founders that can learn from it, right? So I would love to, I always encourage founders to sort of look at these type of situations where what are some of the things that they can abstract from the successes they see, and then apply those principles to their own situations. Not all of them will apply, but certainly some of them could.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, do you think hyperlocal Indian innovations, what are other hyperlocal Indian innovations do you think have global potential? Uh,
Yeah, so just like the hyperlocal 10-minute delivery thing, right? Like one of the startups that I recently saw was in India, offering last mile transportation from metro stations to wherever people want to go. So that's a niche model. It's a very hyper local problem. And the key thing that I thought they were doing was, it was sort of a multimodal option, right? So you could essentially use it for that. You could use a three-wheeler, you could use a car. So depending on the need of the consumer, it's a multimodal option. You could even bike and take your bike home and then bring it back the next day. So they have clearly figured out the multimodal way to solve, again, a very hyper local problem. And I thought it's a very innovative way, because India has its own unique disadvantages and advantages. I would say unique challenges
yeah,
in terms of theft, in terms of monitoring payments, in terms of ensuring compliance with various
there
rules.
has to be some
So
guardrails.
they had to take all of that into account, but still came up with a really solid multimodal solution. It's not a very scaled solution today, but I'm
Yeah,
hoping the next time I visit India, I would see that as a scaled solution in many locations, because this sort of last mile delivery as well as last mile transportation is a major challenge in most
yeah.
Indian cities. And so this is one model. I'm sure there are others that are trying solutions to that. So I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, yeah, totally, 100%. There are challenges, and we need to have a guardrails in place so we can mitigate this problem. You have invested in AI for startups in India. What's your decision-making framework when evaluating whether a founder is visionary versus enthusiastic?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Visionary versus enthusiastic. Well,
Yeah,
all founders are sort of very passionate and enthusiastic by definition. If they were not, they would not choose this very hard route of creating your own startup. I think typically for all founders that would come and talk to me about their product, I first of all, I see my role as not so much as a cheerleader early on, but to ask the tough questions. Because I
mhm.
think one of the key things for a startup is, if they're going to fail, they should fail early, they should fail often, and then find their way into a good product market fit that they can scale. And so anyone who wants to help a startup should help them fail fast if they have to fail. So that basically often means asking the tough questions of, just said X, what do you think is the key assumption in that statement? How do you think that assumption, if that assumption turns out to be wrong, what does that mean? And when you ask some of these questions, a visionary founder a lot of times would tell you something that you had no idea, or you just, the way of looking at a problem is completely different for some of the visionary founders, versus founders that are merely passionate or enthusiastic. They would keep on rotating within the framework that they initially came up with, and are never able to sort of zoom out and tell you a completely different side of a story, right? Like they see what everyone else sees, but nothing beyond it, versus a visionary founder sort of is able to zoom out and tell you something from a very different perspective that you never thought about.
Right, right, absolutely. So, do you think a market timing role has important play role in your decision? How are you timely marketing it?
So do you mean market timing with respect to
Yes,
investing in India?
in terms of investing.
Right, absolutely. I think investing at the end of the day is definitely about both being right as well as being right at the right time, right? Like like this famously say on Wall Street, no investments are wrong. Some are
Mhm.
just not in the right time frame, right? So I think the time frame right now, why India right now. Of course, we all know the growth trajectory that India has had in the last few years. every time I visit India, I see that actually in action. And because I have family ties to India as well as personal investments and passions, I go there quite often. And then I'm able to see those differences every time I land there. And like it has been a year since I last came. And the progress that I see in a year is something I would expect in 4 years, 5 years. And so there's a very fast growth phase that is happening in India right now in all fields, including infrastructure, technology, etc. So that's one. I think the demographic advantages are huge, right? Where I see a lot of youth who are equipped with the right skill sets and are also in the phase where they are willing to take the risks, right? I
Yeah.
think maybe 20, 30 years ago the risk appetite was not as strong, or there were just not as many options to take risk, right? I think the youth today has the option to take risks, which is a key element in sort of creating a deep startup ecosystem. And there are a few other things, right, of course, but I think some of these macro things are the timing element of your question, right? Like where, who knows if the timing is exactly right, or so on. But clearly the direction that I see is going in that direction, which is why I'm very passionate and excited about
Mhm.
the direction that the Indian tech startup scene is taking, specifically AI. I think we will
Mhm.
soon have the largest AI trained workforce in the world, and
Mhm.
that is clearly going to give rise to a lot of product solutions that AI can uniquely answer. A lot of them will be hyper local, or solving local problems, which is great. We have to do that. And some of them will also solve global problems. So that's sort of combined is sort of drives my passion, the timing as well as what I see on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 100% agree. India is growing super fast, and there are a lot of startup founders are coming up. And earlier
That's
they were working in silos and they were not collaborating. Now they are coming up,
right.
especially all the youngest generation, and they are just diving deep into AI stuff.
Right.
So, in your view, what are the most underexplored but high potential problem spaces for Indian entrepreneurs right now?
Yeah.
There are some underexplored opportunities in India.
Oh, there are
So,
many, right? I
yeah.
think some are getting explored, but some probably need more investments and so on. Deep tech definitely comes to mind. When I say deep tech, I'm referring to things like space tech, defense tech,
Mhm.
and things like that are harder to build, right? That sort of don't come as obvious choices unless you really are part of that ecosystem or somehow get exposed to it. Also requires a lot more patient capital. It takes a long time to build out some of these innovations. But I think India definitely has the talent to build it. And so, a lot of Indian entrepreneurs should be looking at these type of solutions. I would also say look at the typical software technology startup is there are many like that, right? There's, I don't think it requires any more explanation. Or but
Right.
hardware is sort of in the age of AI, specifically robotics, is very exciting. And
Yeah.
there are some startups in India that are working on it, but as a percent I would say it's still low.
Mhm.
And hardware is again very hard. It's not a very easy problem. It requires a lot of upfront capital. There's a lot more variability in a hardware startup compared to a software startup.
Right.
If you pivot, the pivots are harder. So it comes with its own challenges, which is why I understand why the percentages are low. But I also think that is a big opportunity for India to explore. And I think the third thing I would point out is just manufacturing, right? I think India has not had the same degree of manufacturing boom that some of the other countries, notably China, have had. And there has to be an ecosystem supporting that type of a manufacturing boom. And startups could play a big role in
Mhm.
propelling that forward, right? So I would love to see specific startups sort of geared towards an industry, geared towards a manufacturing technology, and things like that. I'm sure there are thoughts brewing in people's minds, and I'm looking forward to helping these founders.
Absolutely. I mean, robotics and space, these are the two niche fields I think India could start think about it. And there are some spaces that are unglamorous but could be massive if solved, even, I mean, unproblem things back in India.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I would love to touch on something a bit more personal and cultural. You have often spoken about your interest in Sanskrit and classical texts, which is fascinating because they connect such deep history with the modern world of computational and AI. So, Sanskrit is often described as a mathematical language because of its precise grammar and structured rules. Do you see parallels between that kind of linguistic precision, that way we think about computational models or even LLMs today?
Yeah, so thank you thank you for asking that question. It's very near and dear to my heart. Yeah, I was passionate enough to learn Sanskrit. I actually earned a master's degree in Sanskrit, which was very hard but very
Wow.
interesting. But to answer your question specifically, I would say, so first of all, let me explain why Sanskrit is often described as a mathematical precision language, and it's exactly what you described. The grammar
Yeah.
that Sanskrit has is almost 100% mathematical in nature. So how you arrive from a root in Sanskrit to an actual word is a
Mhm.
mathematical procedure, right? So you take a root, you add certain things to it, you subtract certain things to it, then certain transformations happen in it, and then you get to a final word. And all of this is described in Panini's 2000
Yeah.
codes of how you arrive at those words, right? So that's what people mostly refer to when they say it's a mathematical language. But beyond that, when you study some of the other areas of Sanskrit, right? Like whether it is Sankhya or Vedanta or any of the philosophies, they're all based on a hypothesis and then examination of the hypothesis and then arrival at a conclusion, which is a very very scientific methodology. If you think about it, modern science applies very similar methodology where you start with the hypothesis, you run experiments, you collect data to answer certain questions, and then you arrive at your conclusion. And sometimes the data is going to be definite, sometimes it's going to be less so, but nonetheless you go through that process of elimination to arrive at the right answer.
Right.
Most fields in Sanskrit, including Sankhya, Vedanta, Ayurveda, etc., arrive at the conclusions and the tenets that we know, that our grandfathers and grandmothers have been telling us. Though those tenets, although they are passed generation to generation, at the root of those is that type of a very scientific hypothesis creation, analysis of alternatives, and then arrival at a particular answer. So in general, when you are coding, creating a new product, you do need that type of a clarity of thought about what is the end outcome that you desire, what is your initial hypothesis, why are you taking a particular route to solve that problem, and then why are you arriving at the particular solution that you think is best for that problem. I think there are a lot of parallels between how Sanskrit arrives at some of these outcomes and how a typical product owner or a startup owner would sort of arrive at particular outcomes. So I certainly think there are parallels, and I would definitely encourage more people to learn Sanskrit. Incidentally, I think 3 or 4 days ago was World Sanskrit Day. So
Okay.
if you want any more inspiration, there you have it.
Yeah, definitely. And I read few articles on Vedanta Sar, like 11th or 12th century book. And does it suit computational maths and LLM? I mean, just explain us. This is very interesting, actually. How are we combining two fields here?
I'm sure there is some exploration to be done there. I've personally not worked. I mean, the how LLMs create answers is a computational theory of its own, using and it's almost language agnostic now. So I think in that type of a transformer led architecture, I'm not 100% sure how we would fit the normal Sanskrit arrival at particular words. However, could be used for a lot of clarification and translation type of tasks. And the one area that I would personally love for someone to explore is not the LLMs have the ability for translation today.
Hmm.
My interest is to see if Sanskrit can be used as a base for translation, and if that can speed up translation in terms of latency, in terms of accuracy, etc. And I don't think there has been very deep research about this, but if I have time, or if someone else is interested, I think that's a very interesting topic for research.
Absolutely. I haven't had many leadership level conversation like this, but knowing you have explained everything so nicely, it's really curious. And I know you are reading about Mahabharata as well, and that's a masterpiece. And you are reading about it. It has a huge learning, and you are encouraging everyone to learn or read about it as well. So, any learning from that book that will help us in a daily or a professional life?
Yeah, I mean, reading Mahabharata is a monumental task. I don't claim to have gone very deep in it. It's a huge epic, close to 100,000 shlokas, or individual hymns that each have, many of them have very profound meaning. And you read something and then you sort of walk away for a bit and sort of contemplate as to what exactly is the author saying. And then there are
Right.
stories within stories within stories. So it's a multi-layered book as well. So it's very complex to sort of read cover to cover, right? So some people
Yeah.
who are interested might do that. But I would say there are a lot of modern books being written about Mahabharata, right? Like
Mm.
Ami Ganatra is one of my favorite authors,
Yeah,
who has written really great books on interpretation of Mahabharata as well as Ramayana.
yeah,
My personal takeaway from this is, I think philosophy grounds us all in all of our pursuits. It may
right,
not always have one is to one correspondence about I have a problem, here's a solution from an epic, and great, like there was that's why it is an advantage to read it. I think
right,
philosophy and general broad broad aspect of looking at life outcomes, our pursuits, etc., ground us in principles that help us arrive at our day-to-day answers. Be
right,
it could be product decisions, it could be career decisions, it could be personal relationships, whatever it is. So I think when somebody asks me, like, does it help me in my everyday lives? Well, it does help you if you're open to that help. If you're looking for one is to one solution about here's my current problem, now where in Mahabharata would I find that answer, that
right,
might be a little bit difficult to sort of
right,
pinpoint. So I think as a philosophical book like Mahabharata, and Mahabharata is actually beyond philosophical, because as Mahabharata says right at the start, there's a shloka which has a meaning which says, if there is anything worth learning in the world, it's in the book, and if it's not here, then you would not find anywhere else, right? So it's
right,
a very very poetic way of saying it has a lot of different topics, which includes personal finance to personal relationships to philosophy to how do you run a kingdom, or how do you run a startup, how do you run a company. I think there are a lot of management principles in it, so there is a lot of different specific learnings. But the way I look at it is a bedrock of what you stand for, what are your values, what are your ethos, and then these type of readings and books help you do that, and then that guides a lot of different decisions that you take in life.
yeah, absolutely, 100%. I completely agree. Bhagavad Gita or the Mahabharata, these are the kind of our foundation where we can learn about our daily mundane lives, including professional as well. And I absolutely agree. Abby's podcast, I follow her, and she's very knowledgeable, especially Ramayana, Mahabharata. She deep dive into that context. So, last question, Amod, what's the best career advice you have ever received, and how has it shaped your own leadership style?
Yeah, it's very hard to sort of come up with like one, or identify one specific advice, but I will try here, right? Like one of my ex-managers and mentors, someone I look very highly to, always would would never let me settle in a role. I worked for her for almost 2 years, and I would get frustrated, like, I just started doing this, why would you want me to? And her whole philosophy was, if you are ever comfortable at what you're doing, that is a really bad space to be. So never get comfortable in what you're doing. If you are getting comfortable, that means it's time to learn something more. That means it's like time to push yourself a little bit more. And that career advice has often helped me in situations where I felt like, wait a second, last week was a little bit too comfortable than what I would like, right? So it's not for everyone, but it has worked for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Uncomfortable leads you to the growth, and eventually that is important. So, Amod, this has been such an insightful conversation, and not just because of the depth of your technical expertise, but also the way you connect it to the culture, market, and human perspectives. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your vision with us.
Thank you,
I
Anika. I
really
really
appreciate it.
appreciate you inviting me to your podcast.
Thank you so much, Amod.